Europe is entering another weather transition, but it is not the continent-wide cool-down the phrase weather change might suggest. Prof. The strongest heat is already sitting across parts of Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe, where temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius have pushed health systems, rivers, power stations, and wildfire crews under extreme pressure. What changes next is the geography of that heat craft. Over the coming days, hotter air is expected to rebuild farther north and west in places that are temporarily cooler now, while the edges of the hot air become more unstable and more capable of producing thunderstorms. That is the pattern to watch. Points. On Thursday, Italy placed all 27 cities in its national heat surveillance system on the highest red alert. Austria and Slovakia set national temperature records, with Slovakia reaching 42.2 degrees Celsius and Austria 41.2. Across Hungary, drought and very low Danube levels have disrupted power generation. Germany is dealing with low Rhine levels, while southeastern France remains extremely dry and vulnerable to wildfire. These are not separate weather stories stitched together for drama. They are different impacts occurring beneath a broad, hot, dry European summer pattern. But the atmosphere is not frozen in place. By Friday, parts of northern Germany are much milder than the regions farther south. Berlin and Brandenburg are expected to remain in the low to mid-20s during the day. Prof. Then temperatures rise through the weekend. Current German forecasts point toward the low 30s around Berlin by Sunday, while parts of Bavaria may approach the mid-30s. That is a sharp local swing in only a few days, and it is one example of how the heat field is reorganizing. Farther west, the signal is more cautious, but still important. The United Kingdom's longer-range outlook favors above normal temperatures overall, with high pressure likely to dominate much of the period, beginning around August 11th. Hot spells or heat wave conditions remain possible, especially across southern areas, though Atlantic fronts can still interrupt the pattern in the north, and thunderstorms remain possible in the south. Ireland may also catch the edge of this warmer air. Forecasts there point toward a spell of warmer, drier weather next week, with the southeast favored for the highest temperatures. That does not mean Ireland suddenly joins the 40-degree heat affecting southeastern Europe. Points. It means the warm ridge extends far enough northwest to change local conditions without carrying the same intensity everywhere. Spain tells the other side of the story. Pots. It is not waiting for heat to arrive. AEMET's outlook for August 10 through 16 continues to favor high temperatures while allowing for some thunderstorms over the interior park. In other words, the Iberian Peninsula remains part of the heat reservoir, while the northern edge of the pattern shifts. This is why a map of Europe can become misleading if you look at it as one block pack. The continent stretches from the Atlantic to the Black Sea and from the Mediterranean to the Arctic. The same ridge can produce record heat in one region, ordinary summer warmth hundreds of miles away, and violent thunderstorms along the boundary in between. Craft moving toward Western Europe can cool one area while helping pull hotter air north on its eastern side. High pressure can suppress rain for days, but the moment humidity and instability increase along its edge, the atmosphere can switch from clear heat to severe convection. Prof. That is the change in this forecast. Not summer ends, not Europe cools down. The more defensible statement is that the heat pattern is shifting and expanding unevenly, with the next round of warmth moving into some areas that have recently been fresher, while extreme heat and drought remain locked into others. Plain. And there is a reason this matters more in August 2026 than it would in an ordinary summer. Europe has already been through repeated heat waves this year. France recorded its hottest June on record nationally, then endured another long July heat wave. Copernicus reported that Western Europe experienced its warmest June in the ERA5 record, while Europe as a whole had its second warmest June. By early August, the heat had migrated and intensified again across Central and Southeastern Europe. The atmosphere is therefore not starting from neutral conditions. Plains are dry in many regions, rivers are low, and vegetation has been exposed to weeks of heat. Some power systems are already operating with reduced cooling water. Wildfire fuels are unusually receptive. When another surge of heat arrives, it lands on a landscape that has already spent much of the summer losing moisture. That is the tidal promise. Europe's weather is about to change, but the dangerous part is that the change does not necessarily mean relief. Points. In several regions, it means the heat becomes more widespread again. In others, it means thunderstorms form where hot air collides with a different air mass. And along the Mediterranean and in Central Europe, it may mean the same drought and heat simply continue while the center of attention moves somewhere else. To understand where this is going, we have to look at the feature controlling almost everything, the position of high pressure over Europe, and the way Atlantic weather systems are forced to move around it. That difference between atmosphere and impact is important. The hottest air can leave one country without ending its emergency because water, soil, and vegetation respond much more slowly than temperature. At the same time, a country that has been relatively comfortable can move into heat stress within 48 hours if the ridge expands. That is why the next stage is best followed as a moving pattern rather than a list of disconnected national forecasts. High pressure is often described as good weather because it suppresses clouds and rain. Plain. During a European summer heat wave, that simple description becomes dangerously incomplete. Air inside a strong anticyclone tends to sink paths, it descends, it compresses and warms. Clouds become harder to sustain, sunlight reaches the ground for longer periods, and dry soils lose the evaporative cooling that would normally use some of the sun's energy. Points. Once the land becomes very dry, more incoming energy goes directly into heating the ground and the air above it. If the pressure pattern persists, the process can reinforce itself for days. Plains. That is the basic architecture of a heat dome. Météo France explains that when high pressure becomes established over northern or eastern Europe, it can block Atlantic disturbances from moving freely across the continent. Hot air from the south can then spread northward and remain trapped beneath the ridge. The exact shape of that ridge matters because it determines where the hottest air accumulates and where cooler Atlantic air can still enter. The current European pattern has been highly uneven. Central and southeastern Europe have been experiencing some of the most intense conditions. Italy's nationwide red heat alert, record temperatures in Austria and Slovakia, power restrictions in Hungary, and drought along the Danube show what happens when the heat combines with water stress. Yet farther northwest, parts of Britain and northern Germany have been less extreme at the same moment. That contrast is not evidence that the heat wave is ending. It is evidence that the ridge is not centered over every country at once. Now the northern and western edges are becoming important. Air Germany is a useful example because the weekend forecast shows a fast temperature rebound. Berlin and Brandenburg move from a relatively comfortable Friday toward 31 to 33 degrees Celsius on Sunday. Bavaria remains hotter and may reach around 36. This northward and westward expansion does not necessarily set records, but it changes heat exposure quickly, especially in places where nights have briefly become cooler. The United Kingdom sits even farther toward the Atlantic edge. Its outlook is not a promise of a major heat wave. The Met Office says dry and settled conditions will probably dominate much of the August 11th to 25 period, but Atlantic fronts may still interrupt the north and thunderstorms may break out in the south. Temperatures are expected to run above normal overall, with hot spells possible, especially in southern Britain. That wording matters. A ridge can strengthen without completely shutting the Atlantic out. Think of the jet stream as the fast-moving boundary that helps guide weather systems from west to east. When high pressure expands over Europe, the jet can be pushed north, allowing warm air to spread farther toward Britain, the North Sea, and Scandinavia. But the Atlantic is still there. If a trough digs far enough east, it can send a front into the warm air. That front does not always produce a clean, gradual cool down. Sometimes it produces storms. Hot air can hold large amounts of water vapor. When cooler air approaches aloft or a front forces the warm air upward, the atmosphere can become unstable. Thunderstorms can develop rapidly, particularly near mountain ranges such as the Alps or along boundaries where wind direction changes. Heavy rain can fall in a short period on ground that is extremely dry at the surface. Plain. That sounds contradictory, but drought and flash flooding can exist in the same region. Dry ground can become hard and less able to absorb intense rainfall quickly. Urban surfaces make the problem worse, because water runs directly into streets and drainage systems. A thunderstorm may therefore cause local flooding without doing much to restore depleted rivers, reservoirs, or soil moisture across the wider region. This is why thunderstorms are coming should not be translated into the drought is ending. It is also why one dramatic model run cannot be treated as a continent-wide forecast. Convective storms are sensitive to small differences in humidity, wind shear, cloud cover, and the exact timing of a front. Several days ahead, forecasters may be confident that instability increases over a region while remaining uncertain about which city receives the strongest storm. The broader heat signal is more stable than the local storm signal. Payne's medium-range outlook illustrates that difference. The EMET continues to lean toward high temperatures through the week of August 10th to 16. At the same time, interior thunderstorms cannot be ruled out. Both can be true because the storms are local interruptions inside a much larger hot background. The same logic applies to Central Europe. A thunderstorm complex can knock temperatures down dramatically for a few hours. The next afternoon can become hot again if the high-pressure pattern remains nearby. A cold front can shift the hottest air eastward without eliminating it. One region receives relief, while another receives the heat that was displaced. That is why the next phase of this European summer is better described as a redistribution than a breakdown. The hottest air is not simply vanishing into the Atlantic. It is moving around the ridge, and the consequences of that movement depend on what lies beneath it. Where soils are still moist, temperatures may be moderated. Where the land is already dry, the same air mass can heat more efficiently. Packs. Where rivers are low, another hot spell puts additional stress on shipping and power generation. Where forests and grasslands are desiccated, every windy day becomes more dangerous. The atmosphere supplies the heat. The landscape determines how damaging that heat becomes. Points. That interaction is the reason the next several days matter, even if no single European temperature record is broken. The weather pattern is moving into a new configuration, but the surface conditions left behind by earlier heat waves are still there. Pain. A second clue comes from nighttime temperatures. When nights stay warm, buildings and bodies lose less heat before the next afternoon begins. Some areas are especially vulnerable because concrete and asphalt release stored heat slowly after sunset. A new warm surge therefore matters even when daytime highs are below record levels, particularly if the preceding night offers little recovery. Ports. The most important thing about this transition may be what does not reset. A cooler morning does not refill a river. A thunderstorm does not erase months of rainfall deficits. 2 milder days do not restore moisture to forests that have been repeatedly baked since late spring. Plains, carrying the accumulated consequences of this summer into every new weather pattern. The Rhine is one of the clearest examples. Reuters reported exceptionally low water levels affecting cargo movement, with some services suspended and other vessels forced to reduce loads. Plain. The Rhine is one of Europe's major industrial transport corridors. When water levels fall, the problem is not only environmental, it changes how much fuel, grain, chemicals, and raw materials can move through the continent. The Danube is under similar pressure farther east. In Hungary, record low water levels have forced the country's nuclear power station to reduce output sharply because the river provides cooling water. Romania has also taken emergency steps to protect cooling water access for its operating reactor. Plains. Those actions show why heat and drought can become infrastructure stories long before they become record temperature stories. Now add another round of heat, P. Even if the hottest temperatures shift geographically, evaporation continues while water demand and coolant demand both increase. Power systems work harder at the same time that some thermal power plants become harder to operate efficiently. Wind, under a stagnant high-pressure system, can reduce wind generation. Hot river water can limit the ability of nuclear and thermal plants to discharge additional heat. This is a compound hazard. No single mechanism explains every problem, and no single heat wave causes the entire infrastructure strain. But repeated hot, dry periods can stack impacts on top of one another until a moderate additional change becomes important. Wildfire risk works the same way. A fire does not start because a weather map turns red. It needs an ignition, pop. But weather controls how receptive the landscape is to that ignition and how quickly flames can spread after they begin. High temperatures lower fuel moisture, while long droughts dry grasses, shrubs, and forests. Air wind supplies oxygen and pushes flames across new ground, and very low humidity accelerates drying even further. France and Spain have already faced major fires this summer. Southeastern France remains under high wildfire concern because dry conditions and wind can reactivate fires that appear controlled. The Balkans have also battled repeated outbreaks. When the weather pattern shifts, the fire danger can shift with it. This is another reason the thunderstorm edge matters. Air storms may bring rain, but they can also produce strong, erratic winds. Outflow from a thunderstorm can suddenly change fire direction. Dry thunderstorms can produce lightning with little useful rainfall. Even wet storms can create dangerous wind shifts before the rain arrives. pH. So a transition away from pure heat does not automatically mean a transition away from hazard. The hazard changes form. That is the middle of the story. Europe's immediate weather risk is moving beyond one simple question about peak heat. Plains. The harder question is where the heat remains locked in place, where it expands next, and where instability breaks out along the boundary. Those questions do not have one answer for the entire continent. Across Southeastern Europe and Italy, the current heat remains the dominant problem. Germany is seeing temperatures rebuild into the weekend. Pain remains biased hot into the following week. Britain and Ireland sit near the northwest margin, where warmth can increase without the same intensity, and where Atlantic interruptions remain more likely. Packs. This regional variation is exactly what should be expected from a large ridge interacting with an active North Atlantic. It is also why seasonal forecasts have to be treated differently from daily forecasts. WMO's seasonal outlook for June through August favored above normal temperatures across Europe. Meteo France's summer outlook similarly leaned toward a warmer than normal season in Western Europe, with an elevated chance of persistent blocking conditions. Parameter. Those forecasts describe the background probability over weeks or months. They cannot tell us whether a thunderstorm will hit Munich on a particular afternoon or whether London reaches a specific temperature next Wednesday. Short-range forecasts can do more of that. But even a 7-day forecast has limits when the atmosphere is near a convective threshold. The responsible way to describe the next phase is therefore layered. Observed, Europe is already experiencing severe heat, drought, and wildfire impacts. Price. Hot conditions remain entrenched across large parts of the continent, and some cooler northern and western areas warm again over the next several days. Moderate confidence forecast. High pressure remains influential enough to support above normal temperatures farther northwest into next week. Lower confidence local detail, exactly where thunderstorms erupt, how severe they become, and how quickly any individual city cools afterward. Packs. Separating those levels of confidence is not a way to weaken the story. It makes the story stronger because it reveals what forecasters actually know. Plain. And what they know right now is that the next change is not a clean line sweeping from west to east and ending the heat. It is a moving boundary where heat expands in one direction and Atlantic influence pushes back from another. Air storms form where the two meet, and then the ridge can rebuild. That back and forth can continue for weeks in August. Power. The result is a continent that can look completely different from one day to the next, while remaining locked inside the same larger summer problem. Too much heat, too little moisture, and repeated stress on systems that have not had time to recover. Pain. The next question is what viewers should watch as the pattern evolves. The answer is not one sensational number, plain. It is three moving lines on the map. The northern edge of the heat, the western edge of the high-pressure ridge, and the corridor where thunderstorms begin to replace dry heat. The Mediterranean adds another layer because sea surface temperatures remain unusually warm in many areas. Plain. Warm nearby seas can support humid nights along coasts and provide moisture to thunderstorms when upper-level forcing arrives. That does not create storms by itself, but it can raise the amount of water available to developing convection and intensify short-duration rainfall where storms do form. Over the next week, those three lines will tell us whether Europe's weather change becomes mainly an expansion of heat or the beginning of a more meaningful breakdown. The first line is the heat boundary, Pax Germany, the Benelux region, southern Britain, and Ireland. These areas sit closer to the northwest edge of the continental heat reservoir. Faster rise in temperatures there would show that the ridge is expanding and pulling warmer air farther toward the Atlantic. A weaker rise would suggest that Atlantic influence is holding the heat farther east. Crafts. Germany is already showing the clearest near-term signal. Forecasts for Berlin and Brandenburg rise from Friday values in the low and mid-20s toward the low 30s on Sunday. Bavaria is hotter still. That is not the same magnitude of heat affecting Italy, Austria, or Slovakia, but it is enough to demonstrate how quickly the thermal pattern can migrate. The second line is the storm boundary. As warmer air reaches farther north and west, humidity and instability become more important. Thunderstorms are most likely to matter near the edges of the ridge, especially where fronts or upper-level disturbances provide lift. The Alps, southern Germany, eastern France, and parts of Central Europe often become focal zones in this kind of pattern because mountains can help trigger convection. But the exact placement must be updated day by day. A severe thunderstorm forecast 3 or 4 days out is not a promise that one particular town will be hit. Convective risk is often regional. Plains. The difference between a damaging storm and a dry evening can be a small shift in cloud cover or boundary position. The third line is the drought boundary, and this one moves much more slowly. Point. Even if temperatures fall temporarily, much of Europe will remain dry. Reuters reported that continued dry weather in Germany remains a concern because of Rhine water levels. Cross. The Danube Basin, water shortages have already affected electricity generation. The United Kingdom is also dealing with drought. After an exceptionally dry summer, that means the atmospheric pattern can change faster than the hydrological pattern. A front can arrive overnight. Pack can take weeks or months to recover. This difference is crucial because it explains why Europe may move into a stormier phase without escaping the impacts of the heat wave. Pain. Rainfall has to be widespread and sustained to repair large deficits. Scattered thunderstorms can be dramatic without delivering that kind of recovery. The wildfire picture works on the same slow clock. Vegetation that has dried through repeated heat waves remains vulnerable after one cooler day. Strong winds behind a front may lower temperatures while increasing fire spread risk. Lightning can add new ignitions. The transition itself can become hazardous. So what does "here's what's coming" actually mean? Port. It means the heat is likely to remain a defining feature of European weather through the next several days, but the center of the hottest conditions will not stay fixed. Pause. Some areas in Central and Eastern Europe remain dangerously hot. Germany warms again. Spain remains above normal. Southern Britain and Ireland may see a warmer, more settled period. Thunderstorms become an increasing possibility along the unstable edge of the ridge. It does not mean every country gets hotter at once. It does not mean every country cools. And it does not mean a single model has identified the exact day the European heat wave ends. Pattern, that is the honest boundary. The large-scale pattern can be described with confidence. Europe remains warm to hot overall. High pressure continues to matter, and the distribution of heat shifts as Atlantic systems test the western edge. The smaller details must be rechecked as the week unfolds. For people in the hottest regions, current official heat and wildfire warnings matter more than any continent-wide narrative. Parallels, red alerts, National Weather Service heat warnings, and local fire restrictions are operational information. A YouTube title should never replace them. For people farther northwest, the useful signal is different. Conditions may become hotter again, even after a brief fresher spell. Homes, transport systems, and events that relaxed after cooler weather may face renewed heat stress. And for everyone watching the weather map, the most interesting part is the shape of the pressure field. If high pressure expands and holds, the hotter air can push farther north and west, and the dry spell can persist. If Atlantic low pressure pushes farther east, the boundary becomes stormier, and more regions see temporary relief. If neither system wins, Europe remains split, hot and dry under the ridge, fresher to the northwest, and volatile in between. That may be the most likely description of what comes next, not one dramatic switch, but a moving divide. This summer has already shown how quickly that divide can relocate. Western Europe endured exceptional heat in May and June. France experienced repeated heat waves into July. By early August, record heat had intensified over Austria, Slovakia, Hungary, Italy, and the Balkans. Now the warmer air is poised to rebuild into parts of Germany and press toward the Atlantic edge again. The weather is changing, the heat is not gone. And that is the final image to remember, a map of Europe, with the red core moving, the blue Atlantic pressing from the west, and a narrow, unstable boundary between them where the next thunderstorms begin to rise. That boundary will decide who gets relief, who gets the next surge of heat, and where the summer's next high-impact weather appears. Forecasts will change as new observations arrive. The exact temperature in any one city, the track of a front, and the placement of thunderstorms should therefore be treated as update-sensitive details. The durable part of the story is the broader contrast between a persistent European heat reservoir and Atlantic systems trying to reshape its western and northern edges.